My name is Isaac Taylor. I am an arborist with Almstead Tree and Shrub Care. We're here today working on this beautiful beech tree that we just planted. We put it in the springtime and have noticed some decline with the lower branches and also some tip dieback. It was a fairly involved process to pick out such a beautiful tree, very expensive tree. And when we had dug the hole, right, we picked the tree up before we ever dug that hole. When we dug the hole, we found out that the soil was a little bit different, very heavy clay, not a lot of oxygen in it, very, I would say, compact, very little pore space in the soil. So what we're doing here is we're doing what we can to aerate the soil, oxygenate the soil. We're going to disturb the root ball of the tree, which probably hasn't progressed very far with new roots, a new root system. We're going to force some compost into the soil to improve it, and we'll see if that can make a difference next spring when this tree comes out of dormancy. This is the air spade. It's a fairly simple tool. It's a gun that blows high pressure air. It's connected to a compressor. The compressor needs to be at least a 185 CFM compressor, otherwise we don't get the right pressure to make it work. It's considered a non-invasive process to the tree's root system, so it does a fairly good job at not disturbing the roots of the tree or damaging them in the process of remediating compaction or amending the soil. It does blow off fine root hairs in the process, which can be fairly easily replaced by the tree. Not recommended to do this in the middle of a hot summer, so I limit my air spading to spring and fall or winter. I have a system for everything I do, and I try to do it the easiest way possible every job that I do. So when I do an air spading job, the first thing I do is a root collar excavation. I always start at the tree. So I'll blow out the root collar, and what I do is after you blow one piece out close, you work your way back in a pattern, and once you free all that soil up, the soil has some place to go. If I start out here and I work my way in, all of that soil is getting pushed up. But if I start inside and work my way out, you're moving all of that soil as you're going. Back to the tree.
Back to the tree. Okay. Got it.
So what we've done, we've started the root collar, and we're starting to get down to a point where we're starting to see the true root flare. This over here is pretty well defined, right? So that's what we want to see. Some of these surface roots can probably just be pruned out. This one is dead anyway. We're seeing a pretty decent amount of root growth, and the soil is not gray. If the soil were gray, it would tell me that it's getting way too much water, but it's fairly the moisture is fairly good, and it's a good color. So I'm just going to continue around the backside of the tree, expose this whole root collar, take a look, possibly prune some roots, probably not many because it's a new transplant, and see and go from there. All right. So what we can tell here is that this side of the tree is a very nicely defined root collar. This is what we would like to see on the whole tree. On this side of the tree, it's a little bit less defined with some roots that are going in different directions. and some girdling roots and some crossing roots, some small finger roots here. So I'm going to take some time to prune out some of these small ones, very minor. We're going to be very, very light in our pruning here because this is a new tree and trees need the roots, right? But what I don't want to do is leave this situation with roots that can potentially be problems because I don't know when I'm going to be back here spading this tree again. So if you notice a small root like this, right here, this little finger root cuts across this root collar, right? That's one that I want to eliminate. Anything that's cutting or circling around here, even this root here, I would probably prune this off in a year or so once the tree gets established, but things that are rubbing and crossing around the root collar are generally really not good for the tree. So what I'm going to do now is start what we call a sheet excavation, which is basically tilling all of the soil, fluffing it all up, forcing air into it. Then we'll get the compost in, we'll mix the compost into it. Then we will rake it all out, we'll mulch it, and then we'll move on to the next project. What I can tell you about this tree that I know about it, since I had him run the irrigation on it before I did this, is that the majority of this area, I would say probably not all the way in there, is getting hit with lawn irrigation 3 times a week. It's mulched and it's fairly dense soil. We're not on Cape Cod or Long Island where our soils are predominantly sand. On those areas it's really hard to overwater, but in Connecticut with our soil it's really easy to overwater because our soil is heavily clay and dense. So as I'm working through this, the soils are extremely different. That's the original soil from the tree, and as soon as we get into the new soil, it's a mixture of compost and existing soil. You know, what I'm looking for and what I'm looking at is the soil moisture, right? How wet is it? So you can see that if I squish this with my hand and it makes a dirt ball, that means it's quite a bit clay. It's very clay and it's very wet, right? So that's very damp, which is different from close to the tree. The tree, the soil around the tree was less clay, but it was drier, it was dustier, right? So 2 very different soils happening here. Right? There's a transition and we're sort of homogenizing this whole thing. We're equalizing these soils, but I can tell you that the soil out here is wetter than a tree would want to grow its roots in. It's too damp. And near the tree, I would say it's a little bit too dry. So you have both things here, right? This is where you're going to see fine root hairs. You're also going to see the original soil here. It's very, very hard. It's very compacted, which is okay once the tree's established, but it isn't the best rooting system or rooting environment. see how dusty that soil is? That's a dry soil, right? Dusty here, wet over here. So usually there's a lot of soil here, right? So there's a little bit too much, but we want the compost in the soil. So what I'll do is I'll just spread this compost out into areas that I want. Right? So I'll put a few wheelbarrows of compost around the root system. So then I will work the compost into the soil. And you can feel the compacted areas when you're air spading, right? Like if I feel compacted soil, you can see me sort of breaking it apart with the tip as I'm doing it. You know, I can still feel a little bit of hard soil in here. So you can see I sort of tap the air gun and it'll loosen up the soil as I go down. So what we found with this tree is that a couple things: probably wasn't getting enough water, adequate water around its existing root system. Adding compost and working it right directly into the root ball. Increasing organic matter is usually a very good thing for our soils. You know, anywhere between 5 to 7%. Well, 3 and 5% is good, but 7% is not bad. But we also found that the tree's root collar was lower than it was grown, right? So this tree's probably been in the ground, if I had to guess, I would say 20 or more years it's been growing, and the soil level has been too high for this whole time. So bringing that grade down to where the tree really, the ideal spot that a natural tree would grow. If you look at the oak trees around here on the site, you can see that the root collar is very well and defined. That's what this beech tree should have, and it will prefer it, and it will improve in health. So we're going to smooth it out. We're going to bring the grade down to the proper level, which is probably 4 to 6 inches below where it was before, and then we're going to mulch it afterwards.